We are going to stick with disability on screen in quite a different way, but also in a way, another joyful film. And this is Crip Camp, which launched on Netflix right around the start of the lockdowns. So a lot of people have seen it. I think it's one of the films of the year. It is a documentary that started its journey at Sundance, where it won an award. It's about a camp for young people back in the 70s, 80s, that was for young people with disabilities. And it's sort of the first of its kind. And you'll see this is, again, quite a rock and roll story. And the ideas that started at this camp, Camp Jened, went on to, inspire the Americans with Disabilities Act. So a really amazing film, and we are lucky to talk to the directors, the co-directors, Nicole Newnham and LeBrecht. You'll also recognize Jem as one of the protagonists in the film, who was a camper at Jened, and he works in the film industry, obviously. Because they are based in California, and it is the middle of the night there, we pre-recorded this chat, but I would like to show it to you now, and I think you'll also really want to listen to what Jem and Nicole have to say. So over to Jem and Nicole to talk about Crip Camp. Hello, thank you for joining Carla 2020. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I'm really proud to be one of the moderators and program advisors for this amazing conference. Thank you, WIFTY, for organizing it and getting so many amazing speakers here with us. Before I introduce today's panel about Crip Camp, just a reminder about what Carla is and is not. We have a sort of pledge that we're upholding, which is that I do not and will not condone any form of discrimination by myself or perpetuated by others on the basis of ethnicity, religion, geographical origin, skin color, religious beliefs, sexuality, gender identity, socioeconomic class, disability, or age. I declare that I do not and will not tolerate sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, fascism, or any other ism you want to try to throw at us. We're not having it at Carla. So just wanted to say that. And I know the guests we have today are very anti-ism folk as well. I'm really thrilled. We're going to be talking about Crip Camp, which is for me, quite simply, one of the films of 2020. I feel sure it's going to factor in the Oscar race. That's my own personal view. I hope everybody who's watching has seen it on Netflix already, or maybe seen it at Sundance where it won the award. But if you haven't seen it already, then you can listen to this discussion and then go watch it later. It's just a remarkable piece of work. I'm so thrilled today we have here Jem LeBrecht and Nicole Newnham. They are the co-directors of Crip Camp. And of course, Jem, AKA James, you're gonna recognize as one of the protagonists of the film. So I'm thrilled to welcome them both, and thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts with Carla and our amazing global audience. So if I can start with Jem. Jem, you were a camper at Camp Jened. So where did the idea for the film come from? Had it been something sort of brewing in you for 30 years, or what happened?
Well, first off, thanks for having us here. I've been working in documentary film for a long time as a sound mixer, and also been somebody with a lifelong disability who, watching all the other documentaries I'm mixing, really seeing the power of documentary film. And I, over the last maybe 10, 15 years or so, really have started to really want to try to see films around disability that I wasn't seeing. And Nicole and I have known each other for ages. I've mixed 3 of her feature documentaries, and as she was wrapping up her last film, Revolutionary Optimist, she and I had lunch, and long story kind of short, near the end of that conversation where I had been trying to suggest different films she might be interested in doing around disability, I said, I'd love to see a documentary about my summer camp. I think there's a connection there between these group of people going from New York out to Berkeley, California, and the disability rights movement. So it's been brewing for a while.
Yeah. And did you want to direct it yourself, or did you pitch it to Nicole? How did it come to be that you two co-directed it?
I said I was expecting just to produce.
Yeah.
And as Nicole and I started talking about this, and when she said yes, she also came back and said, I think we should direct this together. So we wound up producing and directing together. And it's the first time I've been directing a film, and so I've never quite found the right words to say how it felt that she said, let's do this together. But it was, it was lovely, and I appreciate it. And I'm really glad we did.
Great. And Nicole, when you heard about the story, this is not an ordinary summer camp. Why did you think it was going to be a story that a lot of people were going to be interested in, and that you wanted to be involved as a director?
Throughout my career, I've worked for in film and television to make money, and I've serially taken on passion projects of kind of independent social justice documentaries that I've felt passionate about. And over the years, I've really learned to wait until my heart starts pounding and I get incredibly excited and I can't stop thinking about something before I think about taking on a project. And when Jim told me about the camp, when he first said, I've always wanted to see a film made about my summer camp, I was curious, but I was also maybe rolling my eyes a little bit, because I think, a lot of people had this powerful transformational experience at their summer camp, but not every summer camp, deserves to be a 2-hour film. And also, I think, as a non-disabled person, part of the process for me of going through this project and working with Jim was kind of breaking down stereotypes, So I was totally unprepared for the description that Jim then gave of this camp, and even more unprepared for the photographs that he sent me later that night via Facebook that all the campers over the years had collated. And I just saw this explosion of love and mayhem and joy and humor and community and diversity that was unlike anything I've ever seen. And thinking that could be, Jim had this theory that something about that profound experience of liberation at the camp sparked the movement that came later. And those are the kinds of things that I think are so exciting to be able to do in film, is sort of show the collisions of things, or the ways that history interrelates and sparks that are kind of dry to put in an article potentially, but could be really immersive for a viewer, that the camp could be a world that we could bring the viewer into, and in so doing shift the way they saw disability and disability community, and then relate one of the great, civil rights stories of our time, basically.
Yeah, I grew up in the States, and I'm really embarrassed that Judy Heumann wasn't somebody that I knew as a household name. And I don't think I'm the only one, so why is it, both of you can talk about, why is it that so little of the world knew about this human rights movement for disability rights? Or am I naive? Do more people know about it than me? Why wasn't it more well-known? Any ideas?
I think it goes back to the thing you said at the beginning. I think it's an ism. I think it's ableism, I think that's why. And in fact, there was a very, very powerful moment that we had when we premiered the film at Sundance, and all the people in the film were on stage, and we were getting wave after wave of standing ovation. It was really extraordinary. And even on the stage, Judy Heumann was getting these questions. Why don't I know about this? Why don't I know about you, And she said, look, this is an audience of, progressive media people. So, if you don't know about it, maybe you should ask yourself that question. Maybe you didn't want to see it. And I think that's true for me too. I vaguely knew about the story, but I knew nothing of how spectacular and how fundamental to our history it was.
And And Jim, from your perspective, why aren't you a household name? Camp Jeanette should be known around the world. Why isn't Judy a household name? Maybe she is more now, but why haven't we heard this story a million times?
I think there's a combination of reasons. I think that just to get a film seen and made, you have to display a certain amount of potential interest in the story. And I think that that's not always the easiest thing to convince people to put their resources behind or be willing to air it. And we have not been, as people with disabilities, we've not been looked upon as a culture or a social movement. I mean, people do remember the passing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and such. And certainly there have been times that people with disabilities who've been demonstrating just even, 5 years ago or so with trying to save the Affordable Care Act here, better known as Obamacare, where disabled activists were going into the Capitol building and staging die-ins. But people just only look upon folks with disability as having something, physically wrong with it versus this being a civil rights issue.
Yeah. And I think it was an article I read about Crip Camp that was noting that, or no, it might have been here in the UK, that at least 20% of the population could be considered disabled in some way. So this is not a very marginal, that's a huge part of the population that does, needs basic human rights. So, yeah. I mean, had you always planned, because I think this summer was 30 years of the ADA. Had you always hoped the film would be out for that anniversary, or was that sort of a happy coincidence?
It was a happy coincidence in that we realized it as we were fundraising for the documentary, and started planning for it. And so by the time we were lining up, our partnership with Netflix, et cetera, we already had that sort of in our eyesight that we were going to try to do that. And we saw the potential of it, and we were excited about it because, in the same way that we hoped that people would come to Camp Jeanette and shift their perception and see disability history and culture in a different way, like it seemed like, as the sort of anniversary month played out last month, I think we both felt very encouraged that we felt like we started to see that the way the media was covering disability history and the ADA, for example, was much less about this legislative accomplishment that gave something to people with disabilities, and was much more about this civil rights battle that had been fought by this community, Yeah.
And I think that's one thing I'm so grateful that I saw this film and saw behind the scenes of that movement, and saw how, these people's activism started a lot when they were teenagers at camp. So yeah, I think it's a very powerful message even in 2020 to see what's happened. And Jim, do you feel like Crip Camp has become a sort of tool for disabled rights in this era? Do you hope that it inspires new activism?
We've seen a lot of people really embrace the film, and it's really seemed, community growing up around it. And there's, we've been, part of our impact campaign has been what we've been calling our virtual Crip camps every Sunday. And we have a few more of these left. But just about from the beginning, there were people who, what we've been doing is having speakers come in and talk and such. But a separate, completely autonomous Facebook group started. And they have, I don't know, a month or so ago, there were 600 people in there from throughout the world. And, people just finding community and wanting to talk more. And I kind of pop in there a fair amount just to kind of see what's going on. And it's just incredible, the kind of people saying, well, I feel like I finally have people I can talk with that kind of understand where I'm coming from. And so that's one big part of it. But Nicole came up with this term really early on that we're kind of this icebreaker.
Hmm.
That we've had a wonderful relationship with Netflix in regards to trying to improve the accessibility of our film. That when we've gone places and such, we've just been able to really raise awareness within the organizations that are asking us to participate. And that's around accessibility, and just, and kind of the message of the film about really looking at how people look at disability.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Both disabled and non-disabled.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I loved about the film is Nicole's already sort of hinted at it. It's not just like, oh, look at this inspiring disabled person. There are a lot of funny moments. There's sex, there's drugs. It's kind of a punk rock film in some ways. And, I feel like a lot of times it feels quite prescriptive how we see disabled people on our screens. And it has to be somebody inspiring and overcoming a barrier, and they're not always a 360-degree character. So I'm curious to hear what your hopes would be for seeing more kinds of disabled lives on screen, whether that's in the documentary world, whether that's in the fiction world. Does it feel like we're going into a period where we can hopefully see more rich lives presented on screen? And how do we support that?
We spent a couple of hours talking about this one issue alone. I've certainly been heartened by some films, or I've been watching a lot of Netflix myself at home, and where I'm seeing characters with disabilities that are just kind of part of the fabric of the project, and it's not like, oh my gosh, we have this film about the heroic person with a disability. It really comes down to what we experienced with Crip Camp, which is that that we want an authentic story, and that can be best told by the people who've lived that experience. And until we have actors with disabilities who have achieved stardom, until people like myself are, or with any type of disability, are in the writers' rooms, who are producers, things are not going to change that quickly. But the stigma involved with disability is filtering out so many people from my community to building careers. And when you look at how people traditionally build a career, and this is how people become the leaders and the tastemakers, or the people that are really kind of steering the stories that we see, having a disability, there's tough barriers that we have. And it's not because we can't do the job. It's that, gosh, you have to be this, intern who can run around and get coffee and go make photocopies and do 20-hour days, and that filters out a lot of people, not just with disabilities. So we have to look at the system that allows people to rise and realize that there's ableism and barriers throughout it. And it's the responsibility of the people in the industry to take a long, hard work at it and fix it.
And so what do you think is some steps to fixing it? Is it just making sure that, the lists of actors and directors you're considering might include people of all races and all kinds of levels of ability? And, is that a start? Is it hiring more disabled people in positions of power with commissioning budgets? Or how can we start to make this better? Nicole, also, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think all those things you mentioned are really important. There's many things that need to happen, but it's kind of, I sort of feel like you see in Crip Camp, after the ADA is passed, Denise Jacobson, one of our characters who has cerebral palsy, says, you can pass a law, but until you change society's attitudes, it's not going to mean much. I think it's that same kind of cultural shift. And it's also, I think it's getting our society culturally to understand that ableism is a thing, and that it's, you know, that it's really destructive for not just people with disabilities, but for all of us. And kind of, you know, making it not okay to discriminate. It has to be not okay to have a set that's inaccessible. I mean, right now, if you wanted to cast a film that had multiple people in wheelchairs, you wouldn't be able to find the trailers that were accessible to accommodate that. You know, we had to rip out seats in a theater to have our entourage at opening night at Sundance. It's that, and it's not just physical accessibility, of course. It's you know, like you said, it's like getting those people in the room, establishing the pipelines, establishing the internships, and so much of that I think is kind of cultural awareness. And so, you know, that's the kind of advocacy work that this growing number of people like Jim and others in the industry, you know, are doing. I think is so critical and necessary.
And Jim, any other thoughts about, you know, specific actions that can be made?
I think there's some things like, you know, well-known performers should have inclusion writers that include people with disabilities, and that people who are casting and directors and producers have to look at people with disabilities being able to play a role that isn't necessarily written specifically for someone with a disability. And, you know, I'm starting to see that. I've been watching this show called The Politician, and there is some really wonderful casting of people with disabilities in that series. And this is where I want to be.
I haven't watched that yet. That's on my Netflix queue.
I'm not being paid by Netflix to promote all of their films. I promise you, it's just that literally 2 or 3 years ago, something like this I would never see.
Yeah. Here at this Carla conference, we've talked about the female gaze, the queer gaze. Is there such a thing as the disabled gaze? Is that an offensive term? I mean, or is it, you know, just making sure that people with disability are involved in the making of these projects?
I think that when you have people with disabilities or any group that's been marginalized as part of what you're doing, there's just a natural way that you're not going to fall into the old tropes. And I think that you could, you know, look at how you're approaching almost any production nowadays, and put disability in that term or deafness in that term. And you can check yourself and say, are we doing it the same for this community as we are now finally trying to do for other communities? And I don't think you're going to see a lot of yeses.
I mean, we thought about that a lot in the crafting of Crip Camp. We thought about really intentionally making it a film that felt to the viewer like a film that was a community telling its story to itself. So it was an insider story, you know, and that was partially to elevate the idea of disability culture, which the film was celebrating. But it was also to make the non-disabled audience aware of this idea of gaze, you know, so that throughout the film, there are these moments where we really tried to challenge the viewer and make them understand that about the way they typically have seen things, and make them feel the joy of a world where that kind of stereotyping breaks down. So, so yeah, I think, you know, I've been reading about other films that are starting to be produced, you know, about like the Deaf President Now movement at Gallaudet and things like that. And it's going to be really exciting for people to be exposed to so many other stories that have the potential, you know, to do that. Because there are so many other, I mean, there's so many other versions of the story of the 504 sit-in and, you know, the disability rights movement in the 70s that we told. There's just a kind of never-ending richness there to be explored.
Yeah, I'm ready for more. We should mention you have some important collaborators on this film, not just all the people we see on screen who are really important, but in addition to my brilliant producer friend Howard Gertler, who we love, you have the Obamas on board, I think as executive producers, if I'm not mistaken. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got them involved and how supportive they've been? I mean, you can slag them off and say they've not been supportive. I don't think that's really true. You can be honest. But yeah, how did you get them on board, and how did that change the film? Did that change the life of the film, the exposure?
It was our brilliant producer friend, Howard Gertler, actually, who had the brainstorm when he read in the trades that the Obamas were entering into a deal with Netflix and were going to start a production company. He immediately thought how exciting it would be to put this story in front of them. And we were still fundraising and kind of at the point of, you know, we had a fundraising trailer and we were inching towards an assembly in the film. And so he was able to navigate to get that trailer in front of Priya Swaminathan, who had just been hired to run Higher Ground, and she fell in love with the trailer and showed it to the president and Mrs. Obama and called us. And, you know, we were really, so obviously we were overwhelmed and deeply excited at what this kind of platform could do for our hopes for the impact this story could make in the world. And we were excited and overwhelmed by the idea of collaborating with them, but we were mostly excited because we felt like we found exactly the right home, and that they really deeply understood that this was a culture shifting project, and they understood that it was a major historical documentary that was, you know, going to be presenting this untold, really important history. So they really they gave us time and space. They believed in the way we wanted to tell the story, which was fairly unorthodox, and they watched, you know, several cuts of the film and gave feedback, which was extraordinary along the way. And you know, I mean, for one thing, you know, you're getting a perspective that nobody else in the world has when you're getting notes from people like that. But also, you know, just by any measure, they were supportive, really incredible collaborators.
Great. Jim, are you hanging out with Michelle on Zoom all the time now, or...
No, I don't do much. I don't do the kind of exercises she does. So
Okay.
We're not exercise buddies. No, it's been extraordinary, you know, being associated with them, and really, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have any wonderful jokes. What's that, Nicole?
Oh, I was just going to say that if you look on President Obama's Instagram, you'll see this few weeks ago, he dropped into a Zoom call actually of our virtual Crip camp and had a really amazing conversation with like young activists in the disability justice movement who were talking about, you know, sort of political activism. So, and the next generation of political activism in the community. So it was fun and amazing.
Cool. I want to start wrapping up, I guess, sadly, but just to hear what you think this film has meant to audiences, because everybody I've told to watch it has loved it. You know, my parents, who don't even watch a lot of documentary, you know, they thought it was amazing. How has that felt? I guess starting with Sundance and then on Netflix, and especially while the world has kind of been locked down and on their sofas, does it feel like you've really connected with audiences, and any reasons why you think that has happened?
Well,
Why
I think
the film so good, Jan? Yeah.
I mean, look, I think that what you're hearing, like we've mentioned, is that people didn't know this story. And so it is, for so many people, it's new, and what was accomplished, what we see that was accomplished and how it was accomplished, the extraordinary ends that people went to. I mean, that is an incredibly compelling story. And it's compelling not because, oh my God, look what a bunch of people in wheelchairs or blind or deaf did. It's compelling because a group of people got together,
Yeah,
and started something. And in the long run, through a lot of guts and grit, we're able to affect change. It's a damn good story.
It's a great story. Yeah.
We see the film being shown in activist spaces, which is really exciting. Like we've seen it you know, being like things online where it's being shown, you know, by the resistance movement in Portland, or it's being shown in Athens and, you know, informal settlements. And people just really like starting their own Crip camps and their own virtual communities completely independent of Crip camp. Last week, Jim and I were on this call with students from Sandy Hook and students from Parkland who've formed a virtual community that's disabled and non-disabled students getting together. That was completely inspired by watching our film, you know? So that, I mean, that level of connecting with audiences is so profound and beautiful. And I think it actually surpasses our hopes and expectations in some way.
That is amazing. I didn't know that story. So if people do want to, I guess, get more involved, is there a Crip Camp website where you're getting people together, or it's kind of informal on Facebook, or where can people find out more?
Well, we do have a website, www.cripcamp.com.
Okay.
And there's a lot of great information there. And also, just let me point out also on the Netflix website, if you go and click on the details for our film, you can download or view a script of the film that was developed specifically for people who are deafblind, so that they can experience the film also.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that was there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the film is in more languages being captioned or audio described than Netflix has ever done before.
Great. And Nicole, any suggestions from you? Just, you know, go onto the website if people want to connect more, learn more.
Yeah, and I think if people want to learn more about this in general, they really should get on disability Twitter, which has, you know, changed my life, honestly. And I would start by following some people like Alice Wong, Maysoon Zaid. If you're in the States, Rebecca Coakley is incredible. You know, there's a, and then you'd find your way to other people. But there's incredible storytelling and activism and culture that is existing on Twitter, and you can just learn a phenomenal amount by doing that.
Great. I also wanted to mention, I'm not involved with it, but in the UK, the BFI has recently announced its a campaign called Press Reset that they developed with a disability advisory board here in the UK. And it's sort of active steps or new ways of thinking for the film industry in particular. And I think a lot of people don't know where to start. So I would recommend, I don't know if it's perfect. You know, I haven't even read all of it myself, but I just looked at the points, and I think if there are people in the film industry watching who want to know some positive steps to make, I would recommend that. So you can find that at bfi.org.uk, and then I think find it from there, but it's called Press Reset. So just a little plug for some people trying to do some proactive work. And as Jim and Nicole said, yeah, check out some of the resources at Crip Camp, and you know, everything at cripcamp.com.
Also, a group of us got together and started a Filmmakers with Disabilities working in the documentary space. And we have a rather good website now. It's fwd-doc.org, which stands for Forward Doc, Filmmakers with Disabilities working in documentary. There's a lot of great information there also. And another way to kind of connect with filmmakers with disabilities and our allies.
Great. Yes, let's all be allies. And thank you so much, Jim and Nicole, for making this film, which is really entertained and inspired, and just, you know, it's just a wonderful film. And I really recommend that people who are watching this chat that haven't seen it, please go check it out on Netflix. But really, thank you for making the film, and thank you for talking about some of these important subjects. I think it's so important for what we're doing at Carla this weekend. So we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And everybody, stay connected, stay allied, and watch Crip Camp. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, it's really weird to be handed over to from myself.
But thank you for joining that first block of Carla. I wanted to thank Jim and Nicole for that eye-opening session, and to all the speakers who took part in that first block, which was "It's not you, it's the system." So I hope you enjoyed that. The next block, the second block, which is "If you don't interrupt it, you allow it," will be hosted by Melissa Silverstein. That will start at 1 p.m. Swedish time. So figure that out in your time zone. But now, never a dull moment at Carla. You can now join us for lunch and networking. You kind of have to bring your own lunch on Zoom, I'm afraid. But other people will be mingling. You can find the link in the YouTube chat. If you go to the program page on the Carla website, there will be a join button. So please go join the lunch and networking session. And yeah, in about 40 minutes, we'll be back with Melissa and the second block. And thank you so much for joining us for this first block. Enjoy your lunch. And thanks again to all the amazing speakers.